Podcast. Welcome back. And today we have a very special guest, someone that I'm really excited to have on the podcast, who's been a staple in the Philadelphia community strength and community for years and years and years. Mr. Cory Walts. How are you, Cory?
Good, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you for taking the time on your busy schedule to hop on. Strength and conditioning at Penn, which is awesome. Been over the weight room. It's a great weight room. You're now leading a great community of athletes, which is it's been very fun to see kind of the progress that you've made in this area and the communities that you've built. Can you kind of give us your origins, what got you into the field, kind of your athletic history, how you got started in the field of strength and conditioning, and what brought you into this great leadership position that you're in now?
Of course. So not the first time people have heard this story. Into sports my whole life. Interested in how can I get better at sports. Was certainly the one of the least gifted athletes growing up. So I had to work at it. Strength training, physical fitness became something that I was introduced to. Honestly, it was probably somewhere in high school. Just knew that it could be a tool to enhance my ability, especially in football and basketball. So started strength training. Fell in love with that, was probably the strongest on my football team, and became one of the better players on my football team almost solely because of the work that I did outside of the field. And then as I was looking into playing football in college, I realized that there was a major called exercise science, clinical exercise science. I had no idea it existed, but it just intrigued me. I loved learning how the body worked, learning how, again, you can improve performance by improving how the body moved, etc. So I went down that path, went to Ithaca College, majored in clinical exercise science, played football there. By the end of my time there, did several internships, specifically with Cornell University and their strength and conditioning program. And then right after, as I was graduating my senior year, went with the Buffalo Bills for 3 months, did an internship with them during their off-season training. And then immediately went to University of Maryland for grad school in kinesiology. So in 2 years there, just volunteered to work with their strength and conditioning department for 2 years. So was around the football team a lot, but also they just gave me teams. I think it was at a point back then where it didn't matter if you were certified or not. They were just looking for help. So I worked with like swimming and tennis, and I literally programmed for those Division I teams all by myself and coached them all by myself. And as I was still in grad school. So that was a great experience. Graduated with a degree in kinesiology, and what I learned there was definitely more in the application in the strength and conditioning realm, not so much in the classroom. We focused a lot on genetics and how genetics play an impact on strength training. And as I graduated, I was looking into, all right, what's my next step? And I've had two paths that I was going to go down. One, if I did get a job, was whatever job would take me on. So I was applying for countless jobs in any area. I'm from upstate New York. I was down in Maryland. So I was applying for jobs anywhere, one of them being Haverford College. I was lucky enough to get an interview there. I was lucky enough to be offered the job as fitness center director, strength and conditioning coach, head strength and conditioning coach, the only strength and conditioning coach there at 24 years old. Never heard of the college, let alone never heard of the mainline area there. If I didn't get that offer, I was going to go to PT school. I was going to go to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I was going down that road, looking to see where I could live in that research triangle area. So that's where I went. Got a job, went to Haverford, was blown away just by the people there. Ended up spending 12 years at Haverford College in that role. I grew immensely during my time there. I was a one-man shop for the first 10 or so years. And then towards the end, I was very lucky to start working with Nat Ballenberg, who's now in Major League Baseball, kind of assuming a variety of roles, but was a pitching coach, baseball player and pitching coach there, but also had a vested interest in strength and conditioning. But just the staff there, the kids there were out of this world in terms of learning and gratitude and collaboration. I learned so much there. And then towards the end of that 12-year period, I was lucky enough to make a few connections here at Penn. Went through a 4-month interview process here lucky enough to be offered the job as the director of strength and conditioning, as you said. And then over 3 months later, or 3 years later now, here I am. But it still feels like, I'm in my first month. That 2 years or so of COVID was obviously a major pause button. So I haven't felt like I've gone through a true year yet. We've had some staff turnover for a variety of reasons. So finally establishing some consistency here is what I'm looking forward to. And that's where I am.
Yeah. And what I've really admired about you, Cory, is now it seems you just mentioned the COVID stuff, but I'd like to take it all the way back into the challenges that you've been able to overcome as a 24-year-old strength and conditioning coach, like head strength and conditioning coach at a small school. And can you talk about how you kind of were able to put your systems in place, craft that culture at a Division III school where community is really the focus?
I learned a lot that first, I would say 5 years. I had a football-centric background in terms of mindset. I think most strength and conditioning coaches do, just because of the culture that at least it was 15, 20 years ago. I've been in the field now 15 years. So getting individuals to, quote unquote, do a program or do what you say was very external motivation driven. And I learned quickly through those first 5 or so years that that's not sustainable. That's not sustainable, not only at Haverford College, but in most places. I learned about relationships. I know that's cliche, but I learned how to get to know people. I learned a lot about perspective, and I'm continuing to learn about that now. I learned a lot about internal motivation, how to cultivate that. I learned about autonomy being such a huge part in giving athletes ownership. So I certainly learned more from the athletes and from the administration and the environment than vice versa. And I carried that into today, whereas I want to take a step back. I just want to create an environment and an experience that cultivates buy-in, that cultivates learning, and everything else will kind of take care of itself, I firmly believe.
Yeah, and I think that's true, because how many athletes did you have as a singular strength coach at Haverford?
It was well over 500. We had 23 teams. Some of them didn't fully train with us. So it was, I think, 18 or so teams. So at least 500 or so.
Right. So that's a huge, like, coming into a situation like that as a 24-year-old, you're looking at that and it could be overwhelming.
Right.
But what I found you're very good at, and what you just kind of described, is taking a step back, looking at the macro level, and how can I create this autonomy and make for their own success, but provide them with the framework to be able to achieve that.
And I think framework is an important word. It's about creating a system. The athletes have to be aware of, all right, what's coming up? Where are we going with this? Where do I have the ability to make choices? And just making it, I don't want to say so they don't have to think too much, but in a way that they can have fun. They can understand the experience, and they can be a part of that experience. So it's not my program. It's our and mostly their program.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting. You had mentioned it took you about 5 years to really find that sweet spot. Like, these things take time. Like, you can't expect as a young strength coach coming in to come in and say, oh, this is going to be working like clockwork the first or second year, right? It's going to take a little bit to figure out those systems for long-term success.
The longer you're in this, the more you know you don't know as much. And I think the beauty of my situation there at Haverford was it was a Division III school. So what that means is in the off season, everything is voluntary. You can't force athletes to do anything. You can't also report anything to their coaches. And it's far enough along now where I'm okay saying this, but I was doing the opposite. I was holding people accountable to being in there. I was tracking them down if they wouldn't come in for a morning run or a lift or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And at some point during that time, my athletic director sat me down, and it's not that she knew the specifics. She didn't know I did those one-off things, but she did know that she was getting some feedback that the kids felt pressure to do certain things. And I knew the kids wanted to do it, but there was these times where they couldn't come for whatever reason. School, life, that happens. We all know that. And they would feel this immense pressure, this immense guilt, because they liked me and they wanted to please me, but they also wanted to please their coaches and their teammates and all this. And they feel this guilt because I would hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
She sat me down because she would hear this feedback. And she not only, number one, she reiterated what the NCAA regulations were, but number two is, let's get them to make the decision. Let's get them to make this sustainable. They have to have the choice, as I've been saying. So where she didn't tell me like how to do that, but then I started talked to Ken Clark a lot about the autonomy piece, the self-determination theory. Nick Winkelman at the time was doing a lot of work with that. And I just started going down the path of giving them choice, and then going back to that framework concept of how can we create a process around autonomy. Is we started to do that. We started to give them choice. They liked being analytical, so we kind of worked in some data and some autonomy with the program, and it really flourished. And they started asking more questions, and they started buying in. And the other big thing about that was it reduced pressure on me, because I would get so anxious that they wouldn't be in. And once I took a step back and gained more perspective, then it was just a big load off of my shoulders too, from an anxiety standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that comes to even the type of school you're at. Like the students that are generally high achievers who want to please, right? And you are someone that was coming from a place of just general caring of like, I want to help you succeed and give you the tools. But you found out, taking a step back, like it's such a quality of person that goes to Haverford that they were willing to take on that responsibility, but let them let them figure it out on their own with some guidance rather than feel pressured just to please.
And I'm also such a hard self-critic on myself that I would evaluate my success based on who would come to a given training session. And I wouldn't think long-term. I wouldn't realize that, okay, if I miss this one session, but Cory's understanding and he's giving me, he's discussing how I can frame my situation moving forward, then I'm going to be more accountable to myself in the future and be more consistent in the future. So I wouldn't think long term. I would think very short term at that time. And now I'm more evaluating on the experience that the athletes are having, and it's so all encompassing that I had these blinders on before, and hopefully those blinders are starting to come off, and I have gained more perspective.
Interesting too. You were able to set up where you were able to by yourself and with an assistant or an intern this entire evaluation process at the beginning of the season to evaluate all 500 athletes and put them in these columns and to make sure they receive the most effective training program. Can you talk about how you implemented these systems to personalize the workouts as best you can within each sport?
Certainly.
I know task.
Yeah, and it obviously went through a few iterations, and who knows how much it actually helped their physical performance. Hard if not impossible to really tell, just because we had so many limitations on what we could actually test. But in essence, there was two processes that we had. One was the movement assessment that you're referring to, and two was this kind of stoplight autonomous system for a given session. So the first process, the movement screening in essence, was based around a functional movement screen, very popular at the time, 10 or so years ago. So we put everybody through it. It was a full screen at first for the first several iterations, and it kind of morphed to a kind of a remedial version where the more remedial version was just ankles, active straight leg raise, and the shoulder flexion. But again, at first it was a full 7-step assessment and simply bucketed people based on what they needed. And, this is a word that I didn't make up, a phrase that I didn't make up. Somebody smarter than I did was movement vitamins. So we categorized people and gave them certain movement vitamins. And at the time we had physical cards. So on the front was their workout, like the 4-week phase, Excel. And on the back was this list of movement vitamins. And we had this closet area where we had these posters that we created. So at the beginning of the year, with the incomers, the freshmen, we would take them through a 5 or 6 week, what we call a foundational program, where we would teach them these movement vitamins, And then during their training sessions, they would come in and they'd always start with their movement vitamins. So that's how we individualize the program. And then from there, they go into their team-specific programming. It was also unique at Haverford College that we had 5 open training sessions per day based around their class schedule, because there was no blocks of time where there's no priority scheduling. And between 4 and 7 at Haverford, they would practice. There was no classes at a time, so everybody would be practicing. So we would have to find training opportunities around that. And we shared the space with the general community. So it was a fitness center that everybody used. So during these 5 times throughout the day, any student athlete could come in. They didn't have to tell me. They come in. They just choose. So if they had 3 training sessions, I would suggest a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for instance, but they might change to Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. So they got into a groove. Long story short, there'd be a diverse sector of student athletes coming in at any one of these times. They go in, at the time they would roll out, they do their movement vitamins, and they flow right to their warm-up and to their workout. So that gave them a lot of ownership. Okay, this is my program. I am more motivated because it is me, and I'm trying to work on what I need. So they enjoyed that. That created more buy-in. The second system was this red, yellow, green light system, where they would simply ask themselves a question. They were prompted based on how their body and their mind are right at this time. How ready are you for training? So simple readiness question. And they'd rate themselves. Oh, I'm ready. I'm a green. I'm in the middle. I'm yellow, or I'm not ready. I'm red. And based on that, they would their workout phases, usually a 4-week phase. It was broken up into green and yellow weeks. So every other week was a yellow or green. So we'd start off week 1 with the yellow. Next week was green. Next week yellow. Next week green. And what that means is, in a green week, it was either high volume or high intensity, and yellow was the opposite. So as they're going through on day 1, they would, based on how they feel, they would do either the yellow or the green week. And if they're red, they would stay home. They would not train. And the goal was to do all of the yellow and all of the green, but they chose the order in essence. So for week 1, if I'm a green, but it's prescribed as yellow, you have the choice. Do I want to just stick with the progression, or do I want to go ahead and do this because I know next week I have a test and I might be yellow next week? But then if you're down to just yellows at the end, you have to do that. Or if you're down to just greens at the end, you should do that. Had to is in air quotes too. So that also worked well. So you had this individualized program, macro level, my movement. You also had the micro and the day in, day out standpoint. How ready am I for training? So again, buy-in, individualization, system within this diverse, a lot of moving parts environment worked real well. And the kids bought in, and even the coaches bought in too. It was different. It was engaging. And it allowed me to get everything done that I needed to.
Because that just creates that culture around. At a D3 level, culture can definitely be hard because athletics doesn't take priority like it does at a Division I level. So it can be challenging to build that culture. And it sounds like over the 12 years that you were there, like it was just part of being an athlete at Haverford. You went in, you met with Cory, you got your program. This is how you ran the program. And I think success even to working with someone that was drafted to the major league level, Major League Baseball, right?
2.
Which is
2 players. Yep.
Which is pretty impressive coming from a small school like Haverford and then getting some people drafted into the major league. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It was not at all my doing.
Yeah. I'll take some credit at least.
Didn't mess it up.
It brings you to Penn, which I'm sure there's definitely some similarities, but also some differences as well. How have you changed your program because now you're working at a Division I level where there's a little bit higher of an expectation from a lot of the athletes and maybe even from you to make sure that you're providing results, keeping kids on the field, all of that kind of stuff?
It's drastically different. So if you walked in, you wouldn't see any of what I just talked about. You would first of all, we have 33 teams, 1,000 athletes, all using the same room. So the similarities are in the people The student athletes think similarly as Haverford athletes. I would not say that the expectations are any different. You would theoretically think that because it's Division I and we play against the Dukes of the world, whereas at Haverford we're playing against the Franklin and Marshalls of the world. But at the same time, the student athletes still want to train, the student athletes still want to perform, and the student athletes still want to win. So that hasn't changed. It might be slightly taller and slightly faster and larger here. Similarly with the coaches, they want to win, so expectations are higher. What is different is the logistics, the process, the staff. So some context. Here at Penn, we have 6 strength and conditioning coaches at this time who oversee, again, all those 33 teams. So we just divide up our responsibilities. So currently I work with 5 teams. I work with both lacrosse, field hockey, and both golf, and every other coach has their handful of teams. And everybody does differently. Just like I provided autonomy to the student athletes at Haverford, I do so now with the coaches. So every coach is able to program, provided you stick within the guidelines of, number one, we have to provide a great experience for these student athletes. So their performance, their health, their mental health has to be a priority. Number two, we're going to use some frameworks, certain data is going to be shared. So we all use Team Builder. We all now use Conduct, which is an athlete management system. We all use Push, velocity-based training system. We used to use force plates. We might be going in a different route of force plates in the future. And we all share an environment. So we all have the same equipment, and we have to collaborate and who's using what at a given time. But what we don't do is, we won't do like Haverford. We won't have those times where athletes are sharing equipment, sharing space. Like, everybody's training in teams here. Might be some smaller groups, but you're still training with your teams. And there's pros and cons to that. It would be pretty hard to organize this kind of free-flowing Haverford structure here when you don't have to. I had to at Haverford. That was really my only option. And then in terms of the individualization, I think it's more auto-regulation here than those buckets of movement pattern needs. We still do that, but I kind of went away from that being the priority. I went more to let's quote unquote manage load and see how we can increase availability as best as possible through again auto regulation. So it seems to be going well. Just a different route of creating buy-in. But again, haven't done it for as long. I learned so much at Haverford over the 12 years. I probably only done, it was 11 months before COVID hit where I started, and I was just learning so much then. And kind of this last year was sort of normal, but not really. So hopefully next year I'll get there. So I don't think I've learned enough yet. There's going to be a lot more iterations to come.
Well, you were hired just before COVID, and you're well within just learning and how they do things, and then COVID hits. How did that change, or how were you able to introduce yourselves to the athletes, right? Because I would assume the second semester had kind of just started, and they're trying to figure out if they're still playing their sports. Can they come to the gym to train? How did you navigate that situation and then figure out ways to continue to keep the athletes training and ready to play? Because at that time, nobody knew if they were going to have the season or not, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so COVID hit, remember specifically, we were on spring break. We had men's lacrosse was practicing on our field. I was out there watching for a little bit, and we got an email in essence saying all activities are shut down. So that was it. We were like 5 games into the season. So I had fall semester, then I had half of the spring semester, and it comes to this abrupt stop. Now you heard some rumblings, things were going on, but you didn't know it was going to hit us. And then the Ivy League basketball tournament, I remember, canceled before some of the other March Madness tournaments. And everybody thought we were being a little too sensitive or whatnot, or conservative, but obviously that wasn't the case. And then everybody went home. Nobody knew what to do. So we thought I'd be home for a few weeks and a few months, and then it became like a year and a half. There was no competition. So obviously the rest of 2020, there was no competition. Going to the summer, we didn't know what was happening for 2020 to 2021. in essence, we were virtual all of that fall semester. Obviously, no competition. Going to the spring, there was decided no competition. Other Division I schools did as much as they could. Ivy League decided not to. And then the same in the fall of that 2021, kids were back, but we were masked. We were in these small pods, like 10-person pods. So it was remedial training. Before that, it was all virtual, and we had to do it through like these Zoom classes. So anybody on campus had to be given the option of joining. We had to do it through our campus rec per NCAA rules because it was in the off season. That brought me back to the Haverford days, so I was comfortable with that. But I was in our room, like again, normally high energy room, hundreds of athletes, and it was myself with an iPad doing some whatever exercise for whatever 15 people decided to show up on Zoom that day. So it was not what I signed up for, but nobody did. And then Ivy League continued to not hold competition through that spring semester. So we held out longer, we being the Ivy League, longer than any other Division I conference, created some animosity within the school, within Ivy League athletes. So obviously that changes buy-in. And then we come back fall of 2021 and have a full season. That first semester, there were some ups and downs with COVID, and then spring was relatively normal. So it was good. But again, I learned so much through experience that I'm still learning these kids. And then we went through iterations of different staff and like, how do we mesh as a staff? I get so much enjoyment out of sharing space and knowledge with like-minded individuals on staff. And that wasn't consistent. So it was hard, but I think I'm thriving on change because you learn so much through it.
That's where you're just uncomfortable that you grow the most, right?
That's right.
How did you keep your athletes engaged? So they weren't competing for a year and a half, right? How were you able to, and I'm assuming like Zoom sessions, like you can only do so much body weight stuff because you have to program based. How did you keep those athletes engaged over that year and a half when they're chomping at the bit to move some weight or enter a competition? Huge challenge.
Yeah, I think the short answer is I didn't. And I don't know if anybody could. Here at Penn, it's certainly more siloed than at Haverford. It's team by team. It's person by person. Everybody kind of approaches it differently. Some coaches were really gung-ho. We're going to have a season. We're going to have people back. Like, let's give this a go as much as we can. Other coaches were like, no, I'm going to be realistic. I don't think this is going to happen. Go away, travel, do what you need to. So, like, whatever the coach sends as a message, like, I have to kind of be within that. So we did some things like the class that I taught you. We had like a Quaker challenge where we did points for doing different things, and it was okay. But everybody do was short term, so we got through it. We did the best we can. I feel bad for the kids that graduated during that time and they didn't have their last 1 or 2 years. I mean, that's horrible. That's what I remember as a student athlete. So that's tough. That was the hard part.
Absolutely. So what continues to I guess be like a huge, like your main motivation? Like, are you motivated by making change in these athletes' lives? Are you motivated just because you enjoy yourself? But, I think I'm like, what's your main motivation at this point? Now you're 15 years in the field. Sometimes in any profession, it's hard to maintain motivation when you're that deep into a profession.
I think I'm motivated by my curiosity now more than anything. And I would say my curiosity has extended to a systems thinking approach. So one of the things that I did during COVID was at Penn, you have tuition remission benefits. So I started a master's program in organizational dynamics. A few people in our athletic department take it or have taken it. But it's in the School of Professional Studies. A lot of people from different business sectors take it. A variety of classes on how teams and groups interact and manage change and their influence and persuasion and storytelling. And again, anything that can shift where a team and group is going. And that has simply provided me a new level of perspective that I've immensely enjoyed. So I'm now very interested in again, systems thinking, meaning how different components of any system interact to influence a result, whether it's a body, an injury, what are the mechanisms of an injury, high level, low level. But where my interest is lying is more outside of sport performance, which I am still interested. That's my day in and day out job, but more in systems thinking for the experience that we're providing these athletes. How do my coaches interact with each other? How do the teams interact with each other? How do we create bridges between silos here at Penn? How do we get different coaches to interact with each other and interact with us? How can we use data to assist that and aid in conversations and aid in the storytelling? So that's where my curiosity and motivation lies at the time.
I love that, because that's kind of where I'm seeing my shift too, is now that we've worked ourselves up into these leadership positions and we're managing people. I think it's a valuable lesson for at this point, and you're leading not just your 1,000 student athletes, but the coaches that are guiding them as well. And looking at other industry and looking at other disciplines to help you become a better leader and manager. I think that's a huge lesson for the up and coming strength coach or anybody guiding people. And I think you see some of that, like you mentioned, Nick Winkleman, Brett Bartholomew is another one who are strength coaches that kind of stepped out and went that direction. And I think you're seeing they're making huge changes in the way that they're interacting and leading athletes, because at the grand scheme of things, like, you're trying to influence the next generation to just be better humans and better people and make change in the world. And I think that's, again, a great lesson to look outside of strength and conditioning. Like, you can be the best program in the world, but if you're not able to convey that program or lead the people in the appropriate manner, it's not going to be as effective.
Agreed.
Yeah. I love that you're stepping outside. How much longer do you have to go in the program?
So there's 12 courses. I'm completing 8 and 9 this summer. So I have 3 more, plus what's called a capstone, like a big paper at the end or a big project at the end. So yeah, in my head, my timeline, I'll graduate spring of 2024. I'm taking my time with it.
I love it. Good stuff. Good. So now you're starting, we're talking in July, so you're in the middle of the summer. What are the types of things that you're doing to get ready as the preseason for you guys, I'm sure, starts in a week or two, right? We're here at the end of July. What are some of the things, and you're working with football?
So football, I don't specifically work with football, but our football head of football performance coach probably has the group, the largest group here over the summer. So all training here over the summer is voluntary.
Yeah.
Most Penn students are doing internships, usually off campus outside of Philadelphia, but a small sector stay here, especially fall sports. The largest group will be football. So he has 6 a.m. training before they go into their internships or their jobs, or some are doing some summer courses. But there's open hours here. We have open hours in the morning. We have open hours starting in the later afternoon, again, out on bookends of the workday. So I'm covering some of those open hours. I don't have many student athletes here, honestly. So I'm assisting, watching where needed, but again, more macro level systems thinking. So number one, we had some staff turnover and still do. So kind of working through that process. Want to get the best people on the bus in that regard. Number two is working through what we have available to help our coaches. So we just started in March a relationship with Conduct, athlete management system. So ensuring that we have all the integrations ready to go. We have the process. Not only do our coaches know how to utilize it, how to get the most out of it, but our sport coaches do as well. Trying to maintain a lot of relationships with our sport coaches, administration. Different committees will meet over the summer, like on higher level stuff, like student athlete experience type things. That and taking time away. I think it's something I encourage my staff to do is, now is the time. So take as much time as you can, decompress where possible. So I try to spend the least amount of time here as I can while still getting everything done. I still love being here, but I see the value in being elsewhere mentally and physically.
I don't disagree, because everybody knows the grind of a strength and conditioning coach. It's early hours and late nights, and So I think you got to take a step back and take care of yourself so you're recharged, so you can provide the best experience for your athletes.
That's true, and I know that's always been the case. And I always and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. Is strength and conditioning coaches like to say that it's a grind. They take pride in that. I'm hoping that's not always the case. Like, you don't see many strength and conditioning coaches retire as a strength and conditioning coach because it truly is a grind, and you're on your feet a lot, and you have those long days, like you said. But I don't know if that has to be the case. And if it does, then it's going to continue to be a young person's game. So trying to change that, trying to draw boundaries for our staff with our coaches, and being more than the strength coach. So getting outside of the walls, being the performance coach, being a collaborator, being somebody that enhances the experience and the performance globally. How can we really help the department, not just how can we get these kids to lift more weights or be able to spot a bench press. So I put a lot of thought into that, and again, aiding the perspective of our strength coaches as they go about their lives too.
Yeah, and I think that's a great macro view of how can you change the profession so there's not so much turnover, so you can create a staff that's with you for a while to really provide the best service for the athletes. And how can you make it a profession and not just a hobby because you like working out? Yeah,
That's exactly
I don't disagree. Right. Yeah. And from there, hopefully people, whether it's the private sector or in the collegiate setting like you, like the administrators or the public start to see the value that we provide, and then pay increases, and it becomes, this career option instead of people just viewing it as something I'm going to do when I'm young.
And we need to drive that change. We need to establish the right relationships with administration, professional relationships, personal relationships. So they see us, again, as more than just those people down there that are doing that thing that they're familiar with but don't really know. So how can we be a true asset across the department?
Yeah, and you spoke on that, or you touched on professionalism, and I know that's important to you. It's how do we maintain a professionalism both in front of the athletes and in front of the administration to, sometimes just how you present yourself is going to garner that respect that says, hey, you know what, we actually provide value. We're not just working out. We're thinking so much deeper than just providing sets and reps.
Yeah. So are we going to all coaches meetings? Are we going to different administrator meetings? Are we dressing the right way? Are we sitting in the front of the room? Are we asking questions, thoughtful questions? Are we providing thoughtful perspective? Are we asking other colleagues out for a coffee, for lunch? Are we inviting other colleagues in to work out with us and is that workout like an enjoyable experience? Mm-hmm. So all of those things combined go into that.
It's actually very interesting. And you're speaking on the relationships there, but as a strength coach at a college, you're actually spending, and tell me if I'm wrong, more time with the athletes than the actual sport-specific coaches are in many cases.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah, and I don't think that's always understood, that in some cases you're spending more time, you're developing better, more deep relationships maybe, and it's not always seen that way because you're just the guy that puts them through workouts.
And in those relationships, there's nothing riding on the relationships like their relationships are with the coaches. Like, we do not dictate playing time. We are not the ones that recruited them. So we haven't made any promises. We're just here to support them. And I think they understand that, and I think they appreciate that, and they confide in us through that relationship. So yeah, we certainly serve a unique role.
I love that. Nice. So to end all of these with fitness professionals through a final 5 rapid fire questions to give them a little bit of more insight into who you are as a person, Cory. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. What's your walkout song?
Hell's Bells.
I missed it.
I said Hell's Bells.
Oh, I love it. That's a common one. That's a great one.
First one that comes to mind. I think I could be a little bit more creative if I had time.
Absolutely. What's your favorite exercise?
Does sprinting count?
Yeah, sprinting is great. Sprinting is an underutilized, cheap exercise.
No, I know Ken will like that answer, but he won't like seeing me sprint. So don't watch.
If you could eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I love brownies or like a meal, like good sesame chicken.
Okay. Going along those lines, do you have any guilty pleasures?
You just heard a couple. Nothing super guilty. Maybe a good wing night.
Oh, I would agree with that. Are you going hot?
No, like a honey barbecue. I'm
Okay.
weak with the temperature.
That's fair. York, but you've been in the Philly area long enough. What's your favorite thing that keeps you here?
The word everything comes to mind, meaning it's in the middle of everything. So my parents are 3.5 hours north. I have other relatives that are kind of the opposite way, about the same distance. You know, you have the beach, you have the mountains, you have New York City, you have Washington, D.C., you have sports, you have culture, you have great food, you have the colleges, the enormous amount of colleges. I've developed some great relationships with colleagues and professionals, now friends in those colleges in this area, and people like yourself. So I think just a little bit of everything. And we love, my wife and family, love living in the area. We were in South Philly recently, moved across to South Jersey. Just there's a lot of great spots to live, a lot of great things to explore.
Thoughts before we close this out, Cory?
You and I need to talk more. We said that going
Yeah.
into this. I know it's hard to do, but I think why you started this, because of the quality of the network here in Philadelphia, is so important and it's so true. Just how can we be able to maintain this labyrinth of connection? So looking forward to doing that, John.
Yeah, and that's part of why I started this. It makes me get back on with you guys because life gets in the way as we have families and kids and professional careers. So this has been a great people I don't connect.
Agreed.
Yeah. If anybody wants to contact you want to share,
they can. Simple way is email cwalts@upenn.edu. But also I'm on Instagram and Twitter. Don't do a lot there, but you can always connect there too.
Okay. I appreciate you, Cory. Thanks for doing what you do, and I'm sure your athletes are loving everything that you're doing.
I hope so, John. This has been fun. Thank you.